So agility, flexibility, it's the main thing to it is if an opportunity comes up, if a challenge comes up, you're able to respond. And with that, of course, comes the ability to respond while controlling risk. Many responses would end the company if they weren't controlling the risk at the same time. So why is it so important today? Are any of you from local companies that don't do business internationally? Not too many. Even if you are a local company, you probably are part of a supply chain that's international. And so your ability to do business is much harder, much more complicated, much more complex. And so you need to be agile for complex business organizations, which are multi-divisional, complex marketplaces, internationalization, complex applications. In general, if you are not agile, it is not good. So people come up and say, so how is Scrum working? How is Agile working? And it's a little like in the waterfall project, how is it coming? You say, pretty good, because we're not sure. You know, we have anecdotes of good things and anecdotes of bad things. But these are public information which are referable. So this is from the both well and badly reputed Standish Group in Boston. And they do a chaos report every year reporting on the state of the industry and what are the main drivers for goodness and badness. And this was the first year in their chaos report where they differentiated between those doing agile development and predictive or waterfall development. In the past, they looked at agile practices kind of as a whole. But this year, they separated them. And when they separated them, they actually came up with the statistic that if you are doing something like Agile, which typically for them meant iterative incremental, you are likely to be 3 times more successful than if you're using waterfall. And in that case, they define success as delivering all the requirements by the date for the cost anticipated or predicted. They don't include the much more successful things like delivering all the value that you anticipated more quickly for a lower cost. If they had added that, it would have even been different. So their quote was, the Agile process is the universal remedy. Interesting, universal. I mean, one could think that's like intergalactic or something. I know it works in our Earth, but I'm not sure about it. By the software development project failure, software applications development through the Agile process have 3 times the success rate of the traditional waterfall method and a much lower percentage of time and cost overrun. The secret is trial and error and delivery of the iterative process. So this is like industry respected hope. So no longer, well, I heard that these guys are doing pretty well. This was another one that I picked up, and this was related to me by some people at the FBI, the CIO and CTO. And they had started a large project back in 2004 or 5, actually launched in 2006. When FBI agents have a case and create a case file, the ability to link information in the case file to other cases and look for commonality patterns, things like that, pretty low level of automation. So the idea here was to link that information to improve their ability to solve crimes, which I'm all for. So they started this project, automate our case files, make it available, make it so it's amenable data mining, and they called it Project Sentinel. And in the traditional government approach, they of course outsourced it immediately to Lockheed Martin, who uses a waterfall approach, standard. And Lockheed Martin bid that this would take $450 million and be done in 6 years. And so they had 4-phased approach. In 2009 or 2010, after 4 years, Lockheed Martin was halfway done with the 2nd phase. Some of the stuff that they developed was out in the field in a pilot mode, but not really adding much value. And this had to be reported on by the director of the FBI in front of Congress every 6 months. How's it going? Well, pretty good. Except he couldn't see it because the Inspector General's office of the Department of Justice came in and assessed this in detail every 6 months. So his ability to say pretty good was very severely limited. So they brought in MITRE, a Department of Defense consulting company located in Boston, to assess how the project was doing. And MITRE assessed that as of that point, they had spent $421 million of the $450 million, and it would take another 6 years and $350-some million to complete it, using the same approach. It smells like overrun, but there it is. So the director of the FBI brought in a new CIO, new CTO, who had both had some practice, some amenability with Agile, Scrum, and they immediately canceled the contract with Lockheed Martin, reduced the staff from 400 people to 40 people, including a couple of cyber crime special agents, put them in the basement of the Hoover building, used Scrum, and delivered the project within 1 year for $30 million. So that has a couple of interesting things to it. One is the belief that Scrum caused the success. False. So their greatest fear is everywhere else in the government they're going to say, we want to use Scrum. Not realizing it was the hard work and intelligence of the people doing this down in the basement of the Hoover building that caused this to happen within a Scrum framework. So Scrum was just a tool. The other thing that we might want to conclude from this is people ask, how do you scale Scrum up to 1,000, 2,000 people? Good answer is don't, right? It could. If you take one team, we were talking about this last night, if you take one team, measure their productivity. They put in the infrastructure architecture, scale them up to 8 teams. Wow, okay, so it should be 8 times the productivity, except they have to integrate their work. So it might be 5 times the productivity. Then scale them up to 8 times 8 teams. Oh, maybe you're only getting 2 times the productivity, but 64 times the cost. So one of the answers is the way to increase your productivity, your capacity, your skills, your ability to deliver early, is not to add more people. This is not a manufacturing production line. So of course it scales. Is that the right thing to do? In the FBI's case, no. Jeff Sutherland and I are writing a book, and it's going to be published on April 16th. And it's in response to a question we get all the time, which is, how do you sell Scrum to our management? And it's always troubled me because, and we're always puzzled, like, how do you go to a manager and say, would you like to have a more productive development organization, produce higher quality work, of more value, more rapidly? And of course they would say, oh no, I don't want to do that. And so this book is a management book. It's being published by Wiley, by their business management press. And the very basic strategy of it is from the Declaration of Independence, which is that all of us are endowed with certain unalienable rights by our Creator, included amongst these life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and software in at least 30 days. This is an inalienable right of every business person. So the intention of this book is to talk about the benefits and some examples of how people have used, we don't even say Agile or Scrum, but how they've come up with a different approach and how it works. And then telling them that they have every right to go down to their development organization and demand this, that it's being done worldwide and there's no reason they can't have this also. That this isn't something that we sell to them, but my goodness, they can ask for and expect that this happens for them. It's a bit of a twist on how we sell this to management, but there it is. And yes, it's software in 30 days, and inside it says, or less. But that was kind of tough to fit in the cover. In it, we talk about some patterns of adoption. So after we talk about what's new in the environment and how what they can expect and how they can do things differently, we talk about some adoption patterns that they might look for. And the first is what's typical in most organizations, which is stealth. You don't tell anyone because you'll be crushed. And so here's where we're developing software and our business person partner goes to a cocktail party. Oh, they don't have cocktail parties anymore. Goes to the bar and hangs out with the guys, the fellow dudes or something like that. Sorry. And says, you're not going to believe this. I saw working software today. And his person he's talking says, really, can my guy go talk to your guys? And it starts spreading. And so that then comes into the second form, which is if you take aspirin or most medicines, it says take as needed, which is PRN. And so this is creating a formalization of this approach that is stealth and bottom-up, which the business people can take and use as needed. So this has some degree of greater formality,
But the idea is don't try, for heaven's sakes, to spread it through your organization. That's going to slow this down incredibly. The next approach is, again, not trying to spread it through the organization, which is a change activity, but to create a separate and parallel organization where we tool, we process, we set up personnel practices, we set up all the things needed to develop software with an agile approach using Scrum and using good engineering practices. And if you choose to build your software, have your software built in that area, great, but you have to sign something saying this is how I'll work as a product manager, this is how I'll work as a developer, and so this is for those who are willing and want to do this. And the reason we're proposing this approach goes back to the old joke about a person hauling a huge rope up a serpentine mountain road, and someone says, excuse me, why are you hauling this huge rope up a serpentine mountain road? And he says, I got tired of pushing it. Nothing is harder than convincing people who don't want to use Scrum and Agile to do so. So this says we're going to create an environment where they are doing so and the others can look, and hopefully slowly we'll drain that area. The next area is organizational enterprise change. And this says there's enough compelling evidence that this is the right thing to do that we are going to do this enterprise-wide. And so this goes after all the practices. Both Jeff and myself have done this in any number of companies, and it's very encouraging, it's very appealing to look back on it, except almost all of those organizations slide back. And the reason is the person who caused this to happen, and maybe his or her chief lieutenants, they're successful, they're promoted, they go elsewhere, and it hasn't been driven into the organization. It's just caused by them and their persistent effort. And so they don't go back to waterfall, they don't go back to as bad as they were or ungood as they were, but they are certainly no longer an organization that's continuously improving. So this type of improvement is maybe 1 or 2 years, but not persistent. We consulted with John Cotter, who is a change specialist at Harvard Business School, and he said, yeah, what you're looking at is organizational persistent change, like we tried with Lean, like we tried with TQM, all those other things. He said, in that type of thing, the effort, the likelihood of failure, the disruption is incredibly different from the other approaches you're talking about. He said, in particular, you have to focus on all heavy communications throughout the organization. Many places where we help use Scrum, you still see rumors. Where there are rumors, there's not good communication. Second thing is he looks at anchoring it. That is changing every practice, every policy, every procedure, which talks about doing things in a much more prescriptive, much less empirical approach. And the third thing that he prescribes is that you have to promote the people who are agreeing that this is a good approach so they run the organization. This has to be a changed organization, not a facade, not a layer on top. And his experience is organizations that do this typically takes 5 to 6 years, and he has a success rate of about 30%. And he's the best in the industry. So it means this is hard and very serious work. He has a book, a real simple book, which is Our Iceberg is Melting, which talks about a penguin on an iceberg who happens to notice that it's melting, and going through the 8 stages of John Cotter's enterprise adoption, enterprise change. And one of the things they did is they had to form a little group that were working on this, and in the group they had to change the mindset of the penguin colony from, we are the penguin colony that lives on iceberg 7240, to we are a colony of penguins who happens right now to be living on this iceberg, but we're actually migratory, so we will of course be going to other icebergs. So they had changed their identity, their belief in who they were. Interesting. The other approaches really don't hit the identity. So Scrum, I often in sessions ask, what is Scrum? Can someone here tell me what it is? So like, can you tell me? This is how we got volunteers for Afghanistan.
When I hear Scrum, I always think of the rugby term.
Scrum, rugby term. People with determination, willing to move the ball down the field regardless of consequences and certainly competition. Is Scrum a rigorous process that tells you what to do? One of the things in Scrum is that it's just a framework. So if you go and buy a chess set and open it up, there's some rules of chess. You know, like your pawn, 1 or 2 spaces, your bishop diagonals, and you go to play chess with someone else, like Scrum, in software development, and you have read the rules, but that doesn't make you a good chess player. It means that you know the rules. You can get slaughtered when you play even a mediocre chess player in your first game. They might even say, excuse me, you cannot take your king and move it 14 places. Those aren't the rules of the game. But you can continuously improve, play better players. You can find books on tactics and strategies, very much like the book that you have been receiving from Sam and Nino on how to build software using Visual Studio. So Scrum is very much like that. It's like the rules of how you build software in complex environments, the framework. And if you actually go to look at the Scrum guide that Jeff and I have about what is Scrum, it's only 17 pages long. That's not going to make you build great software, but it will give you information about what you're doing that you can improve on so you can do continuous improvement to get better and better. Wow, that's a lot of words for one slide. So it's a tool. It's iterative incremental, so iterations of 30 days or less of fixed length. At the end of every iteration, we create an increment that's done, potentially usable, that gets added to iteration by iteration. And we use, and here's a key aspect, self-organizing cross-functional teams. One of the ideas of complexity is people who are left to their own devices do far better than people being told what to do. So if I have 40 people working for me, I tell them what to do, they're constrained to my apprehension and intelligence. If they figure out how to do it, we have 40 people's intelligence. Scrum, this is a study by, God, who was it? Version 1. And they, of course, sell tools that go to Scrum, so this is probably tainted. But it says that Scrum is heavily used in the industry. Probably XP would be right up there also, except it started diminishing with Kent Beck kind of retiring in 2004. But the two of them occupy the mind share, mostly because they're the only well-formulated processes for agile development. So second, there's Scrum. It's an approach toward doing software better. What is ALM? So it's the coordination of those software development activities, including all the things we typically do, requirements, design, architecture, modeling, development, building, and testing. So it is the stuff that happens within the sprint, within the iteration. And it's tooling to support that. And inherent in tooling is, of course, the belief that there are certain practices that are using that tooling. And it's an enforcement of those processes. It's a management of relationship between those artifacts, so you can do requirements traceability, and it's reporting on progress of the development effort as a whole, which is, of course, a little touchy, but there it is. So it is something that instantiates, just like XP might have, the work that a team does within a sprint, and it's the tooling for it. If you take a Scrum team, let's say 2 or 3 teams, and you don't have tooling like ALM, and they build an increment of software with all the tests, and by the time they get to the second or third or fourth sprint, the time needed to do the build, the time needed to do continuous build, the time needed to testing starts swamping the available time in the sprint. So this is the thing that allows us to continue iteration by iteration building increments. Okay, so what is it? It's the automation of all the processes during the sprint. It is linking and tracing the artifacts, and then it's the reporting on the things that are happening. Now there's a new concept, relatively new. It's been around for maybe 20 years, but really started to pick up over the last 5, called product lifecycle management. So ALM is application or software lifecycle management. If you're building a product that consists of maybe all software or hardware and software. Let's say if you're building a car, this is the type of process that manages the bill of material in that product, including the software, so that we can do version control and configuration management and complete testing, modeling, simulation of that to make sure that it's something you want to drive or put in your heart or something like that. So PLM is a complete product lifecycle manager, and ALM would be the part that instantiates the software part of that. However, both of them would have to, of course, be using the same bill of material database, so you can do traceability of all the components. Last thing you want to do is have a car accident and say, I don't know why it happened. They said, well, we don't know what version of software you're using, so we can't tell you. Not a good thing. So ALM, coordination of all software development activities, PLM, managing the entire life cycle from conception to design manufacturing to service disposal of hardware and software systems. Example of an ALM is, of course, Visual Studio 2010. Example of PLM are like Windchill and Integrity from Parametric Technology. Interesting that they are both built using Scrum. Another interesting thing is they are large pieces of software, and yet neither of them have extensive bills of material down to a component level, so you could do assembly and reassembly so they could be extremely agile. So that, for both organizations, becomes their next set of work. So Scrum, ALM, PLM improve the chances of developing high value software that are agile, that have an optimal life cycle, not just the sprint, not just the project, but the entire life cycle, and integrate other components and products. This is a clear, easily understood model of a PLM cycle for cars. The items that are checked there are parts where the ALM fits into this entire model. Some of those check marks are both hardware, software, but it's where ALM fits into this entire thing. Now we address Microsoft and Scrum.org, the ALM part of Scrum and of Agile through this course. One of the things we discovered very early is that giving people the tooling is interesting but not adequate. Giving people the ideas about XP, about test-first development, refactoring, cyclomatic complexity, all that is interesting but not adequate. Telling them they were free to do what they wanted was interesting but not adequate. So in this course, they're taught iteration by iteration to build increments of software, failing, finally succeeding, using Visual Studio in an iterative incremental environment as a cross-functional team. So what we're trying to do is get them to understand not one aspect of it, but the entire aspect of what we're going to ask them to do when we turn them loose with software. And not bad. It also has assessments. A lot of assessments. You can take an assessment and see how you're doing. So that's the purpose of an assessment, to see how you're doing, not for someone else to assess you. Now, this is also a shift we've made very recently, and it relates to the phrase Scrum but. Have any of you heard that phrase? It's commonly used to shame someone. So you say, are you using Scrum? And they say, well, yeah, but we haven't been able to pull together a complete, fully tested, regression tested increment at the end of the sprint, so we leave a lot of what's called technical debt and otherwise called crap at the end of each sprint, which we handle in the stabilization phase. So they're not using Scrum. Except what we decided was, that's wrong, they are using Scrum. Matter of fact, the Scrum is defined in the Scrum guide, the 17-page thing. Just like if you move your queen and king appropriately in chess, you may not be playing a great game, but you're still playing chess. So what we're really saying, we decided, was it's not that they're not using Scrum. They're using Scrum. However, they haven't improved their engineering, tooling, people practices to a level where they are a top-notch development and product organization. So what people can now say with great pride is we use Scrum, and we are at this level of continuous improvement of developing software. Sounds much better, right? So this is an initial thought about this, and the idea here is Scrum, good, but beyond the framework. So each one of these areas has a whole level of characteristics, has approaches, best practices, good practices even, patterns, assessments, all sorts of things. And the very first one would be Scrum. Are you using Scrum? Did you have a daily Scrum? Was it half an hour? So, yeah, okay, that's fine, you're still using Scrum. So basics. Then we have +1, which is using Scrum and starting to have the teams doing self-organization, having them take things on. And here, this is where we start seeing the productivity. So a number of things like that. Self-organizing team, my experience is it tends to be significantly more productive than a team that just starts using Scrum. So +1, you can say, we're +1. +2 is when you start increasing the quality, and with the quality, of course, the transparency of the artifacts. And this is where we start improving our engineering practices and the tooling. So this is where we start seeing ALM being extensively used. By the way, this is not linear for all things. People practice, engineering practices, process practices go at different rates up and down this. So ALM at that level. The third might be integration. This is where if you have multiple teams or even one team, that they're able to integrate and pull together all of their work continuously would be a great thing, at least at the end of every sprint would be an adequate thing. So you actually know where you are at all times. Pretty important, so you have predictability, risk management, control. On the fourth level would be where you start being able to optimize value, being able to choose when to deliver, what to deliver, and this starts bringing in things like continuous flow. The ability, so within one sprint, not just to have the increment at the end, but maybe a variety of increments being put live on a portal, say, or in a car, say, throughout the sprint. So at that point, the sprint boundary becomes a control mechanism rather than an event where we deliver just software. And then the last one is a software product line, a fairly new concept. And this is where if you have a car, if you have a truck, if you have anything, hardware manufacturers have bills of materials of what that consists of. And in the bill of material, at the very small thing like the screw, it has components that are well identified by lots of things, characteristics, testability, strength, all that, that are put together into subsystems and into systems. And this is that ability with software starting at component level. So this is the serious implementation of object-oriented. Grady boots just rolled over. Felt much better. So in releases, if we're looking at the continuous improvement model, major releases are at the bottom. All you can really readily do is a major release of software on a product maybe every 6, 8, 9, 12 months, unless it's a portal. You can also do minor releases, so 4.0 versus 4.1, which resolve problems. The next level might be ability to do a functional release. So if you have a product, the ability to just ship a new function independent of the entire product and have the customer implement it without all their data going to a situation that you wouldn't want. Next is continuous flow, and the last one is the software product line. And on the right, we have the aspects of an organization that need change, need revision to make that happen. From Scrum to people working in self-organizing teams to the ALM and the skills, engineering skills, underlying product quality, and then the software product line and PLM structure. By the way, this is not CMMI. So there are no assessors. If one comes in and says, I'm an assessor, get rid of them, okay? And this would be, with each level, one, you might see these as anticipatory, but much more to the point, this would be a way of an organization saying, or a development team saying, okay, if we've done these things, this is the sort of things we can expect in terms of metrics. By the way, I am dead against metrics. Metrics, by and large, were used in waterfall because we had no idea what was happening, so we tried measuring anything we could. They take time to measure, they take time to analyze, and they often cause behavior that's optimized to that metric but destroys the rest of them. So these are offered with great reluctance. Productivity at the Scrum level going up, what you could anticipate times a baseline unit. I have no idea what the productivity is in most organizations. When you ask them, they say, how much more productive are we going to be with Scrum? And you say, I don't know. How productive are you now? You say, I don't know. So, well, I don't know either. But this would be your starting point, 4 to 5. And then the number of defects we find in that. So defects are measured from the time you do your last iteration, your total set of increments, through the point of shipping and 3 months into the field. So for the 4 to 5 pieces of software functionality we ship, when we start using Scrum, we would expect to find 150 defects. And it says plus because the standard deviation is so wildly various that we can't really make it more precise. ROI and value, so if you have a value of 1, when you start using Scrum, this would be the increase in value, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. So these are just things that we're playing with that we would expect based on a number of our experiences and our own measurements that would fit with that continuous improvement model. This is a chart done using those figures. I'm sure charts like this were used with case tools, information engineering, structured methods, everything like this. So certainly interesting. Try it, see what really happens. Neat thing about Scrum is suddenly you have things that you can precisely measure where the business shares the definition with these software developers. An increment, how much business functionality does it deliver? How many defects do we find in? That's a baseline metric which we've never had before. These are primary release strategies. I'm sure you're all familiar with major releases, which we generally consider a disaster. The concept of major releases of a product are that you have a sausage skin called the deadline, and you cram as much stuff as you possibly can get into there, and you lobby hard to get it into that release, because if you don't get in that release, which is maybe a yearly release, you have to wait another year to get it out. So the idea of valuing and ordering stuff that goes into a release isn't nearly as important as just getting it into the release. So this would be like the 4.0, 5.0 definition. Minor releases are things that fix flaws, minor things in that major release, but that don't change the way the customer uses the product because they don't want changes. The next would be a functional release where you spot a great opportunity. So for instance, let's say that Microsoft Excel didn't have pivot tables. We could offer a new function called pivot tables, and we could make it available to customers. They could implement it. It would in no way affect the way you use Excel. It would just extend it. And of course, that adds some issues because when you call support, they would have to say, and what version of pivot tables are using with what version of Excel? So it adds some stress to most organizations, but it certainly makes you more agile, ability to respond to opportunities and to challenges. This is a lesson from SAP. They have great software used in many, many organizations. How many of you have implemented SAP? Much smaller than usual. Massive software. You give it to an organization, 1 or 2 years, it is customized, ABAP add-ons are done, your organizational procedures are redone, everyone's retrained, and so guess what? Their customers don't want new releases. So no matter how brilliant the ideas are in the current releases, the customers go, I don't want it. It will upset my organization. It'll cause a lot of money retraining. It'll cause me to have to recustomize, rewrite the ABAP procedures. And also, it's a huge risk to my entire organization if it doesn't work. So over 50% of their customers are 2 releases or more back. So there's something fundamental in the whole way they've approached business that stops them from being agile. Now they're really struggling right now with the idea of functional releases, but that will be a major trick. So functional releases, ability to pass out new releases, ability to iteratively incrementally generate those releases and give them out more quickly. And so at that point, if you're building function against an architecture and against some standards, a major release is simply a declaration of all of these functional releases that have been put out. Great agility, pretty hard. What you have to do is take your software so that it's structured so the areas of the greatest opportunity for competitive advantage are structured so they don't have a lot of dependencies on the rest of the software and data, so that you can ship them without changing everything else. Secondly, you have to have them so that customers can take them into just an area of their workflow, a supervisory area, and implement it with only changing that area and no other ripple effects. So minimize risk, maximize control. And the third aspect of this is you need a bill of materials so that your support organization, when you get a call, can tell what the customer's having troubles with, so they can instantiate something like that and try to replicate the problem. Whoever said agility was going to be easy. So it goes well beyond me being able to work with the two of you in a team to build a piece of software. It's how do we position that software within our product lines, with our customers and our support organization? What's our sales structure? So there's been a concept that's been around for about 20 years, and it's really started happening extensively and for competitive advantage over the last 5 years. And it's called a software product line. And so this is a software product that addresses a particular domain, has a architecture or a backplane that everything works within, that has standards, interface connection points, all those things. And it shares a common library of components that can be built into subsystems, that can be built into subsystems and shipped. So suddenly you're seeing a bill of material approach very similar to what people do with hardware. Wow, better be using some pretty good engineering practices to do this. And so what it does is it satisfies the needs of a particular market and goes from a common set of core assets that are managed as assets to the company. It's not just a glob of software that we try to get a new release out of. It's something we can configure into something that gives us value. Great words. What does that mean? So the idea here is, and this is, there are people doing this are claiming, that this maybe is the next approach to getting more value, more agility, and more capability from software, hardware products. So wow, okay, so we kind of got Scrum, we're starting to get ALM, we're actually doing some test first development, bill of material. So, issue. So why would we want to do that? And this is the asset development process for a software product line. Asset being a software component. We look at the product constraints, the production constraints of us using components, the production strategy, and what assets we have in place. We develop those software components and they go into any number of product lines. They go into the core asset base and they go into a production plan. So we're building components. Huh, interesting. A component are the most basic units of functionality. If a component, let's say it's an object, has the smallest difference in its public behavior, it's a new component. And in these, public behavior is minimized and cyclomatic complexity is also minimized. Otherwise, you don't have a unique component. You have one which has a bunch of unique things in it. So we have contractually specified interfaces, behavior. We have the components specifying within subsystems as they roll together what happens when variations in the way they work occur so that you can test them. So you start seeing much more in the interface specification. All the components are versioned. Every one of the components has to be totally independent of all other components. The difference comes out at the subsystem level. Boy, this sounds like a pain in the neck. Chad, can you call Sam and tell him he's got a new book to write? Okay. And again, low cyclomatic complexity. And so then if you want to build a new product, you take your core asset base, which is hardware components, software hardware subsystems, and you take a product description and you roll them up into the top level bill of material and you ship them. It's got an identifier in the shipment so that if you call for support, you can say what you've got and the support person knows what it is. So interesting ideas. Interesting, except it's actually being used now. So this was a presentation I heard from a guy who's in charge of product structure within Raytheon. And they had, this was 2-3 years ago, they have this great over-the-horizon radar, which can pick up, you know, in the other country when troops are moving or ship movements or anything like that. And one of their customers, I forget the name now, Homeland Security, came to them and said, so that sees like over the horizon. We've got a lot of guys down on the border who want to stop other people from coming over the border. Could it see over a small horizon, you know, in something that's mobile? So they took and reconfigured all of the stuff that made up that over-the-horizon hardware into something that could fit into the back of a Ford F-350 truck, and they were able to see over the horizon. Incredible response. And then they came up with another variation of this that was used in Iraq first and then Afghanistan for, again, movements of people slightly over the horizon. Turns out if you raise your head to look and see, you're likely to get shot. If it's radar spotting it, not as bad. So I would call this agility. So I was talking to Steve after his presentation. I said, so how has this worked for you? And he said, we have like 12 hardware divisions. It works great. We have a software division in Dallas. It's a mess. He said, we can't at all be agile with it because it's just a bunch of stuff. That's a good description for software, a bunch of stuff. So this is a Volvo. They've changed the Volvo a little bit, but not visibly to you. For instance, they have taken and put a control bus in the instrument panel, and the control bus receives signals. None of the cars anymore have, except maybe some, have any direct wires going like to wheels or to steering or to brakes. Instead, they drive by the wire. So it's all signal, electrical signal. So all the electrical signals are brought into this control bus, and they put then programmable electrical control units at various places, like near the brakes, near the steering wheel, all that, that can cause those things to respond differently based on the signals coming into the car. So control bus goes in, radar transmitter maybe goes into your mirror, goes into your front bumper, back bumper, and has contained with it a control unit, hardware, software control unit. These cars now have over 100 million lines of C code. That's a lot. They use, in some instances, sysml, like UML code generators, so it's not, you know, a lot of people. Sometimes it's people, sometimes not. 20% of an R&D budget at Continental, which OEMs all these types of systems to Mercedes, to BMW, 20% of their budget goes to this software development in these systems. Now this is a $35 billion company, so it's a lot of money. They have 12,000 software developers. That's a lot. They do 99% of the defect correction in cars now through software. For instance, if you want to ship a car to Japan, they really like soft brakes. So they change the software so the braking is slow. If they ship the same car to Italy, they like hard brakes, so they change it so this is all software. No mechanics with wrenches. Interesting. So this is a new module. This is actually a little like an iPhone app. that someone came up with who doesn't work for Continental and sold to them. And they said, wow, if you have all those signals going around, we could, and I could sell you this app which meets all your standards, all your interface specifications, works on your bus, which will use the thing that spots if there's rain on the windshield and the car's off to spot any windows that are rolled down and roll them up. That's nice. Maybe 50 cents, except they'll probably charge a lot more for it. Pure software improvement. These are, look at Continental's site, and they describe all of the safety features they have for cars, the safety systems, subsystems. And then you look at the description of exactly those systems which are sold to Volvo and to Mercedes, and the prices they charge for them. These are identical systems that work off pre-existing hardware. So if you buy all these facilities to be able to spot pedestrians, jam on brakes if you spot a car in front of you, adaptive cruise control, lane departure, all these things, for Volvo it's $2,800. For Mercedes it's $5,780. Is anything different? Brakes on the Mercedes are bigger, but that's part of the hardware cost. This is pure software variation cost for stuff that comes from the OEM and is identical. Wow, what an opportunity. Think of the Rolls-Royce. So if you're thinking about this, you're thinking, okay, so we've got programmable control units working off signals that come from different parts of the car, come through a common bus that can then be interpreted and sent out to cause the car to operate differently. How do I program them? How do I ensure that I programmed it correctly? Back when I thought I was rich, I had a Mercedes 300E, 1980, 92, whatever, and it came out with what's called an adaptive cruise control, where you set it on, it'll keep you a pre-selected distance from the car in front of you. The car in front of me went around a sharp curve. My car sped up to catch up with it because there was nothing in front of it. Not a good adaptation. So these things need a lot of modeling, both in simulation, not only in just software, but also in real cars before you can vet them. This is another type of system. And what we require to do any of these systems is standardize architecture and infrastructure, standardize interfaces, bill of material structure, partial code generation, automated complete testing, simulation models, product level stress testing, and complete product identification. So this is an anticipated farm of the future from John Deere. From somewhere in the farm, there's a computer, and it detects soil aridity. Through GPS and radar spots the different flow, the gradation of the land, the exact parameters of the land. And then you can hook any farm implement like discs, like seed planters, like a combine, and send it out, and it'll do the right thing precisely without an operator. So it's easy to spot one of these that has a bug. It's on the highway headed toward you without an operator, right? But this is a farmer-less system. Now what's interesting here is this is from the John Deere US website, and it says the future of farming is in sight. You go to the German website and you take it through Google Translate, and it says order here. So what they're finding, and we're finding bit by bit, is the people who are most skilled at this are the Germans and the Koreans. US companies, by and large, are not skilled at this sort of software development, nor are Japanese companies, nor are Chinese companies. So this is a type of skill that will, for any number of years, give Germany and Korea competitive advantage. That's it. We're all in software development. We live in very interesting times. The need to produce more food, the need to manage our energy better, the need to manage our global infrastructure, water, power, is huge and significant. All of it's much more complex. Waterfall clearly doesn't address those things, nor does even Scrum. But the use of Scrum with increasingly sophisticated software development practices and tooling is a thing that allows us to do it. Some places are doing it better than others. The reason I'm here, the reason Chad and Centauri and Microsoft hosted this event, is that we want you to work with us to make this happen. Of the things that have to be in place for this to happen, it are people who are engineers, software developers, who want to do great work, want to learn, and want to do the best they can to basically help our society function. Because the only scalable resource that's left on the earth is software. Do you guys have any, by the way, you're not guys, do you, men and women and young ladies and young men, have any questions that I know the answers to that I might entertain? Yes. Can you stand up and shout?
So Ken, I really liked one part of what you had to say, which is the analogy of chess and viewing everything as a set of assets that can be deployed in different ways.
So you like one thing that I said?
One part of it, that part really resonated, but one part really worried me. You very reluctantly proposed a set of metrics, and I saw that scary set of 5 levels. And it seems to me that Scrum in the future can go in one of 2 ways. It can become like real chess, competitive competitions and stuff where real skills are improving all the time. Or it can become yet another fake black belt bureaucracy like Lean Six Sigma. How do we make sure it goes towards real chess and not fake black belts?
Did everyone hear the question? Metrics, most dangerous thing around. They can be used for driving uniform behavior. One of my greatest concerns when I showed you the ALM slide is it produces a lot of reports. For who? If for the team, they pretty much intuitively know what's happening. If they're for management to see what's going on inside the sprint, then you have a complete contradiction of philosophies between Scrum and empirical self-organizing teams and management. These, like when we create the software studio, the intention of them is to justify further investment. We have created that much more value. We are costing that much less. We are doing that much higher quality. That is the payoff in ROI for investing in this. So that's an intention. Also, one manager at Carbonite said, I love Scrum because I'm a manager. If I don't have numbers, I can't manage. But you are clearly understanding the paradox there because we're trying to do empirical. Now I'm left with a bit of a conundrum because an Agile portal, an Agile thing like the Windows, trying to be in a Microsoft environment, all those things require one type of technology. If you get into that German continental software product line management, you're increasing the degree of standardization and rigor that has to happen throughout. So there's some balance point between there. Not sure. Just like the last 20 years of my life, we'll see. Yes?
I'm wondering about...
He's wondering.
Yes. I'm wondering about the problem of regression testing when doing frequent releases. If the system is large enough and sometimes we encounter a legacy system, you don't have full automation test suite. How can you maintain frequent releases? Because the cost of regression testing will become so high. Do you solve it by selecting an area that you...
Did everyone hear the question? Okay, so a first answer is to rephrase what you just said. Not, we can't do the regression testing that frequently to, right now, we can't do the regression testing. if you take the cost of technical debt and the cost to remediate it and all the stuff that's on top of it as you go ahead with things that weren't caught early, it vastly outweighs the cost of spending a lot of money on servers, automated tests that continually become regression tests. So the value of it is huge. The investment in it is tremendously worthwhile. Is it hard to do? Yeah. Do we need it with waterfall? No, because we just generally ship what we have. It's your next challenge.
So essentially you're saying that automated refactoring tests should be absolutely required.
Yes. And if it goes, if you write something and a nanosecond later, and it doesn't work, a nanosecond later he writes something that overlays it, we've started to build a logarithmically increasing cost to remediate it. So I might say that I'd like a regression test with all the performance tests every nanosecond.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
I've got a quick question. I noticed like in the latter half of your presentation, you started talking about the product lifecycle management and moving towards like more functional releases.
Yes.
Which requires you to build software in a manner that allows you to fulfill those types of, just inject a piece of functionality into a pre-existing software without really affecting any of the other parts.
Right.
And to me, I kind of sensed, and maybe you can just clear this up, there was somewhat of a contradiction to what I've been learned about Agile, and that when you're building with Agile, you kind of build just what's needed or what's asked for, and you kind of refactor things, and you don't really future-proof that much. And just maybe get your comments on that.
So we have engineering disciplines and practices. If you called in an electrician here and you said, we have an outlet over there and I need power up here, can you run an extension cord across the floor and put duct tape on it? He would say, sorry, I can't. Building codes, engineering practices, we can't do that. That's not the way we work. So I would be expecting us to start building software so that we have more isolation, so we have independent pieces that work without each other, both for total cost of ownership. So rather than just the value of the release, because as we build it as one amorphous glob, the total cost of ownership starts going up like that. And what we see happening when it goes up like this is the velocity when you go in to change it goes down like that. And then the amount of new functionality you can actually produce in a major release starts going down and down and down until you can start predicting when that company will be no longer competitive. So our traditional approach from Waterfall was to get anything we could kind of working into a release to hit the date that it slipped. And so we produce some stuff that needs a lot of remediation. And it's hard to do in iterations. However, if you say that refactoring is part of Scrum, part of iterative incremental development, it has to be accommodated within that.
What, 2 more questions?
By the way, a lot of things here, I know Scrum pretty well. I'm an operating systems developer. I've been in software development a long time. A lot of things you're hearing are my experience and my opinion. Take them with a grain of salt. Okay?
Thank you. What is your take on the application of the Scrum to the old corporate mantra of buying software, implementing software, building extensions, and taking 18 months to deploy a solution? And we usually have that challenge when corporate IT says we're going to buy software, we're going to configure the software and just build extensions versus actually building the solution that the customers need. And then we face this lengthy deployment times.
Yeah.
And then we face exactly the slide you presented on SAP. We fall behind on releases,
Right.
and we start patching because we're not up to speed. What is your take on that particular aspect? And how we can use Scrum or agility concepts to shorten those cycles?
So one, the first answer is, of course, don't do it anymore. The second was at KeyBank in Cleveland, Ohio. Their trust software was so old and so unagile that they couldn't stay up with their competitors. So they went out and evaluated a whole bunch of new trust systems and found a perfect one. And so then they were trying to figure out, should they use Scrum to implement it or a more waterfall approach? It had 23 feeds back to mainstay operational systems. And so we're discussing this. I said, why don't you take one of those feeds, take a couple of data elements in there, and see how they work with this trust package. Because I think you'll find that they've been reused by any number of people in the trust department or elsewhere, and maybe the definition isn't that firm. So in one sprint, they tried doing that, and they found indeed that they couldn't even get 2 or 3 elements up in one sprint. And then in the second sprint, they tried taking, with relational integrity, cross-referential integrity between 2 feeds, 4 or 5 elements each, and they couldn't get those to work. So then we sat down, we talked, and we said, your choice is to use waterfall, probably an 18-month implementation, or Scrum from this point forward. I would hardly recommend waterfall. If you use Scrum, you're already not seeing that you're not getting much done. You're going to continue not getting much done, and the project's going to be canceled. If you use waterfall, things will be hidden for a good 18 months, and you can find another job. So I would recommend waterfall. So if you want to know what you're doing, if you want to control risk, if you want to project costs, you have no choice but to have real artifacts that you can assess progress by. Doesn't mean people will do it. People are very constrained by their habits. So, by the way, that includes me, the constrained, right? Yes?
So, in some ways, I look at Scrum as a mass deconstruction of the software development in general. And at the,
Can you see that again?
in some ways, I look at the spark of Scrum and where we've come as a mass deconstruction of software development.
Yep.
And a rebuilding upon the core of Agile Manifesto and people becoming the center.
And best practices that have been around for 30 years.
Right. I see kind of 2 things at play. One, there's a monetization of it, and 2, a natural tendency to, as these processes mature, the lightweight framework becomes a little heavier over time, and I think a couple of your slides touch on that. You mentioned version 1, but keep in mind they're monetizing this, and you see some metrics. Right. In our organization, we're a healthcare company, fairly heavy process corporate mentality. We're having a lot of success with Scrum in these early stages of adoption because as a VP, I'm able to kind of top down. I'm really interested in your upcoming book. I think as some of these forces of this slim framework start growing heavier, operational forces, more traditional corporate mentality, do want metrics, do want
Yes.
change. So these initial sparks that you get of valuing people and early adoption, I'm interested in some maybe advice, perspectives on how you keep it fresh, how you keep engagement of the more traditional operations mindset, and kind of how you combat these forces of making the process grow over time.
Good thing you're not going against most of the habits in software development. So, a couple of ideas. One is, if you listen in conversations and anyone is saying, well, we have to make sure, then you've got people starting to stifle possibilities. And yet traditional managers, their job is to make sure. What we're trying to change them to is to see what happens and do everything they can to make it happen better. So they become facilitators, coaches, opportunists, rather than production line managers. So make sure is one classic mistake. Another is having meetings where someone says, this is classic, the end of a sprint, team says, well, we got this done. And someone says, well, but you said in your past velocity indicated that you would have had 16 things done, you only had 12. What's wrong? So we hear a lot of discussions in the Scrum community about velocity and its ability to predict. And that's the death of empiricism, because the two of you are sick in the next sprint and we open up a part of the code and it's a black hole. That's not a good or bad thing, it's just a thing that happened. So when you hear people using metrics to demand performance, again, you've got a problem. And it's just an old habit showing itself. The other is, if you look at a number of the lean books, they talk about the idea of bottom-up intelligence or the knowledge-creating company. And just take a look at those more and the practices that they contain and start supporting them. The major part of this that's so different is we don't have an expert telling people what to do based on their brilliance. Instead, we have people who are dealing with the real problem, doing the best they can, and the person at the top facilitating it. And it feels risky as all get out, because how can you make sure they do a good job, right? Good luck. You've got the right attitude. Hard to make it happen, but it's a good attitude. Thank you very much. I started in this profession some 30-some years ago. Chicago was a very different place then. I think we have the best profession in the world. Where else can you get paid to take a complex problem and solve it? And work with other people to solve it and turn it into something that's of great value to others. I mean, we have really the best job in the world, and people are needing us more and more. So I am delighted that you're here. I'm delighted that you're working with all of us to make this happen. And I want to thank you for being here. So I think it'd be good for all of us to applaud each other on this journey.